Hello and very warm welcome to all of you in this edition of Public Forum. South China Sea has been in the news since last couple of months for all the reasons that world is watching with bated breath. The situation in this region has reached at the somewhat inflection point where no one wants to return. All the involved players, that means countries, have wrangled over territory in the South China Sea for centuries, but tension has steadily increased in recent years. China, Vietnam, Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia and Brunei all have competing claims. The point of contention is a couple of islands that Paracels and Spratleys. The entire region is fully endowed with the hundreds and thousands of rocky outcrops, atolls, sandbanks and reefs. For instance, Scarborough and Shoals, China's claim the largest territory which is defined by 9-dash line. In the month of July this year, China got the setback as the ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague said that the Chinese claim over 19% of the South China Sea territory are illegitimate. China remained defiant. US comes in the picture as this is the second most used lane in this earth, and China's dominance will have an adverse impact on the US and its allies and its business interests. Though US says it does not take sides in territorial dispute but has sent military ships and planes near disputed island. Recently, in the name of freedom of navigation, now amid this simmering tension of spying and counter-spying, there comes a news about that China's first aircraft carrier and 5 other warships passed by Taiwan and sailed into the contested South China Sea on Monday. What would be the consequences? We are going to discuss in this episode of Public Forum. To discuss this, I've been joined by two prominent guests. Let me introduce you. I have been joined by Mr. Jaydev Ranade. He's a former additional secretary and comes from Center for China Analysis and Study. Very warm welcome in the show. And Dr. M.S. Pratibha. She is Associate Fellow IDSA. Very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Your comment about this sudden movement and the prospective escalation of military escalation between the US and its allies and China.
I think China has been very deliberate in its timing of sending out its aircraft carrier and the 5 other warships through the upper portion of the South China Sea. As you know, it claims 3 million square kilometers of the South China Sea, and it's always been pushing for recognition of its dominance in this region and its sovereignty. I think they have chosen a time when the US is in between presidents, or at least they feel that a new president has yet to take over. So they are signaling that this is something that they're not going to give up on.
Okay.
And I think if we look back at the anthem of the Navy's recruitment song, Chinese Navy recruitment song, there also they refer to the South China Sea and how they will not give up even 1 square inch of the 3 million square kilometers. So this is a way in which they're signaling to the other countries that we are going to be here, we are going to use force if necessary, and they're also signaling to Taiwan not to go too far in its moves to try and, as the Chinese say, establish or move for independence or get too close to the US.
Okay. So we are asking a few of the questions that is related with the territory and India as well, and these questions can change the dynamics or will answer the changing scenario of the race for the control of this South China Sea can lead to military escalation. Is this a concern, or why India's South China Sea stand matters? You comment about the present dispensation in the United States is also not very, doesn't seem to be conducive to solve this dispute. Do you see any sort of solution in coming years and coming months?
Well, I really think that China will continue to push, and I think the United States will continue to resist.
Okay.
If we look at the people whom Trump is nominating for US Navy Secretary, US Commerce Secretary, etc., the contours of a hard line against China are now visible. And if the individual who has been named or nominated as Navy Secretary takes over, then he has a plan to build the US Navy up to 325 warships.
Okay.
Obviously, that means that the US will not concede space in the Asia-Pacific region. Similarly, if there is economic pressure on China, it will indicate a tough line by the Americans on China. But on the other hand, we have a very strong China, we have a very powerful president of China in Xi Jinping, one who is determined to recover the so-called lost territories of China. And in any case, he is heading for a party congress towards the end of next year. So he cannot even afford to appear to be weak, even if he does want to negotiate. So I think these are the real picture that does exist.
Okay.
And till the end of next year, I don't expect any drastic reduction of tension, though I do not think either country is prepared for conflict.
Most of the countries, the neighboring countries, especially like let's say Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and other countries, Brunei, are not very pally, are not very comfortable with China. Is this give the sort of leverage to the United States and its allies?
Yes, certainly. In fact, particularly Japan, which is very strong and has a very powerful navy, but they have a problem with China in the East Sea, so that is in the north.
Yeah.
At the same time, they can be a very reliable partner of the United States in this area. Vietnam is another country that has been feeling the Chinese pressure and which is a tough country. I mean, they're unwilling to cede ground either. But we are seeing Chinese economic muscle at work when we look at the Philippines, how they've been able to pressure the Philippines and get them to flip sides, as it were.
But the new president in the Philippines have not been that hostile to China.
Exactly. So he has gone and actually palled up to the Chinese and said, you know, we can do something together. But let's see how it goes, because South Korea is unhappy at what the Chinese are doing. Australia is sitting on the sidelines because it's got trade deals with the Chinese.
Right.
But in these areas, if we just look at South Korea, if we look at Japan, if we look at Vietnam, then there's a kind of an arc that forms around China in the South China Sea, which the US can certainly use to bolster its own position.
Dr. Pidwa, how do you see this moment? I mean, especially the escalation of the tension, the military movements by the Chinese and the US Navy. How do you see it, and will this lead to any sort of military tussle or tension or what?
China has been very careful not to go into the beyond the nautical miles 20. Even while they were sailing through Taiwan, they stayed after the 20 nautical miles of Taiwan's EEZ. So they've been very careful to stay within the international law, what they call it. But also you have to see they have given sufficient notice that they would start the drilling, live fire exercises in these areas. So before coming to South China Sea, they had traveled from Pohai Sea to LOC and then going, coming through the Partial Channel, and they have entered the South China Sea. So there have been sufficient information which has been given out to the outside world. So they've been very careful and calibrated risk that they have taken in this region. At the same time, while this is calibrated, they are also pushing for their presence in the region to showcase that they can take a military action or showcase their military power in the region. So it is a signal to the US to take them seriously and to redraw the negotiations. So to showcase, to tell the US that yes, we are here and we are a powerful country and you have to take our interest into consideration.
Okay, and China's claim or say that the region belongs to China, and it gives the documents and some proofs of the maps since 1947. But most of the countries are no takers. So what is the solution normally do you see, especially that the de-escalation of the tension should be there?
Well, I think the onus is on China, because they are the ones who actually laid the claim over 3 million square kilometers. The Permanent Court of Arbitration, incidentally, has dismissed all their historical claims.
But China has been defiant.
Yes, China has in fact refused to accept that.
Right.
So that is the situation at the moment. The other countries are not willing to accept. So I think if there has to be a de-escalation, there will have to be a compromise, and China will have to sort of agree to some kind of arrangement whereby they say certain waters are neutral or international, and that they lift their claims on those waters. I don't see China about to do that. As I said, they've already put a lot of prestige on the line. So I don't see them backing off from that.
Okay.
As far as the US is concerned, they don't want to cede their position as the only superpower. So they also want a say in this region, and they are not going to be willing to give that up. So I think we are seeing a situation where willy-nilly, there will be tension for the foreseeable future.
But this term, this freedom of navigations, I mean, in the name of the freedom of navigation, most of the countries are coming with the US, especially on the moral ground or practically. Will it change also the dynamics?
Well, it depends on what China does. At the moment, if we look at it objectively, China has not interfered with the freedom of navigation. It has not tried to interdict anyone in these waters so far. But what they are objecting to are two things. One is US overflights, spying overflights, and second is US naval ships conducting surveillance operations, sonographic surveillance operations of the Chinese coast. These are the two solid issues that they have. As far as the waters are concerned, they haven't really tried to block any international shipping so far. And if they don't, then the situation remains okay at the moment.
But recently China caught one of the drone of the US Navy.
Yes, exactly. There is a contest about international waters or not. It is a small drone, and I think they were testing the US on that. And I think Trump, by saying they can keep the drone, has actually removed the negotiating platform that the Chinese were seeking. So he has been quite smart in that, taking that decision. But I think the way the Chinese are going on this entire issue, they've been very careful, as Ms. Pratibha pointed out, to stay in international waters, to signal their plans for the military drill quite early on in the day. But at the same time, they have successfully sent out a series of signals to the others. So I think it's a game being played out that we will have to watch and see where it goes. But as I said, tension will remain for quite some while.
Former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has some idea about solving this solving this problem. And if we could show this bite to our viewers, it would be, it would be good for the people who want a solution in this part of the land.
South China Sea issue can be calmed down in the way the Taiwan issue was calmed down 40 years ago. Not by making a final settlement, but by getting both sides to agree to live with a set of circumstances they can tolerate. And that would be my answer in general. I don't think they are planning a military challenge in the South China Sea. They're planning pushing out their defense perimeter. But the issue is, can one come to an agreement that combines freedom of navigation with some of their concerns in a way that permits us to have a period of time to look at the deeper problem.
Do you endorse or do you believe that what Mr. Kissinger is saying, okay, both the parties and all the parties can live together with some sort of a patience and then with the dispute as well?
Basically what he's saying in a different language is what the Chinese said much earlier, that we can set contentious issues aside. And look at other possibilities. But the Chinese have never said that they are going to give up their sovereignty, and I stress the word sovereignty, over the South China Sea. They've laid claim to 3 million square kilometers. What happens to that? So according to Kissinger's suggestion, and mind you, he has a lot of business interests with the Chinese. He's got a consultancy which is doing very well. But yes, it's a sensible way of dealing with the problem, but it is also to some extent a Chinese way of dealing with the problem, saying we keep it aside and later on we'll see. In other words, in brackets, when we are more powerful, we'll sort it out.
Okay. Do you also believe that what Mr. Kissinger is saying?
I think it has to be looked at from a broader perspective. See, Liaoning is the first aircraft carrier, right? In a few years, they have already announced that they're going to build an indigenous aircraft carrier, which means their naval aspirations and naval power is going to increase. And they have stated in their media that Chinese aircraft carrier will go into the Pacific, into the Eastern Pacific. So I think what Kissinger is saying is the coming challenge of Chinese power to the US. Again, he's speaking from the US perspective. Can they live together together? Can they be patient with each other in this area? So I think, you know, from the US perspective, from a very logical perspective, it seems like a sensible idea. But the factor is we have so many other countries involved in this region. We have, you know, Southeast Asian countries, you know, involved in this region. Do they agree to this kind of arrangement? I think that has to come into play. One, and second is like what will be, how will India will look at this kind of arrangement?
Right.
Now China wants US to stop writing the rules in the region for China. So this is a kind of a competition and hedging happening between these two powers. So we are all on the sides like watching this competition and trying to decide what are our role in this you know, issue. So that is the most important thing from the US perspective, and from the Chinese perspective it makes very good sense.
China has directly or indirectly warned India to remain off from this region. What should be the role, and how do you see that India's role would be in the coming years or coming months in this part of the sea?
If the issue is Chinese expanding, you know, maritime and naval power, they have said already that they are looking at the open seas. If they can come into the Pacific, they can come into the Indian Ocean region. It's not an alarming aspect, but it is of interest to us. So I think Indian you know, thinking has to take the long-term plans into consideration, and we should be watching what's happening on the South China Sea very carefully. And I think whatever decision or statement we should give, it should be in line with our own foreign policy interest and our own values.
Okay. And what is the role of the Russia do you see in this changing scenario after this new US president has come into the power? Do you see any change in the Russia's role in this region?
Well, in this region, Russia has been very close to the Chinese and has got even closer after the sanctions against it by the West. Let us see whether Trump is able to ease the sanctions on Russia and whether that changes Russia's dependence on China.
But the indications are there.
Indications are there, but not of Russia's dependence on China being lessened. So that we'll have to wait and see what happens. So I think that is a factor that, at least for India, has a lot of relevance. Whether Russia moves away from the Chinese or not, whether its overtures to Pakistan cool down or not, these are factors that directly impinge on us, and we'll have to wait and see how the relationship with Trump works out. But if I may just mention 2 points on the South China Sea which you raised. One is we should also remember that the US has no territorial interest in the South China Sea.
Right.
So I think that's important, particularly from Kissinger's point of view, who says we can discuss you know, difficult issues later. But as I think she pointed out, the countries in the region have conflicting and competing territorial claims with China here. So I think that is the issue. The second thing, and I think that is the most important, is there would have been no issue if China had been looked at as a benign power. But the manner in which it has been assertive over the last few years, since particularly 2007, has, I think, made everyone very uncomfortable. And that is why we are seeing this sudden change in, if I may say, atmospherics among the countries surrounding China.
Okay, and what's the role of India do you see in the coming future, coming months in this part of the region?
Well, we are building up our relationship with the other countries. We are certainly forging a good relationship. I would say building on a good relationship with Japan, as much for our infrastructure needs, as much for our technological needs, as from the strategic point of view. We are building it up with Vietnam. So I think these are very good relationships that we are building and consolidating. And China's behavior is in a manner, I think, encouraging these countries to look more and more towards India.
Okay, and this movement, this is the aircraft carriers movement, is only about the posturing, about the something the China wants to send the signals to the other countries. Is it only about the posturing or something else?
I think they want to expand their capability. Before the first aircraft carrier, they said it's only for training. But last month in November, they said that the aircraft carrier has combat capability, which means that they have weapons on the board. So this is a signal in some way that we are expanding our military power. Whether it's just posting, I don't think so. I think they are interested in protecting their slogs. They have been very vocal in that they are going to protect their slogs. so which would span the Indian Ocean region also. Now the question is, how are countries going to respond to it, and that's what they're trying to decide. Are you going to be detrimental to our interest, or are you going to cooperate with us? So that's the thing that we need to decide. How are we going to look at Chinese presence in the region?
A few people are also saying that China can declare this region. I mean, South China Sea as a air defense identification zone. I mean, especially it's sort of a no-fly zone. What should we saying it? And this could be the second step towards the U.S. movement in this part of the region.
Yeah, they have said this against US surveillance, measures, because they feel that all these surveillance measures are against, collecting data over Chinese submarines. And if you see the Chinese submarine capability, they want the Chinese submarines to be docked in the South China Sea, because that's the only place has enough depth to dock a submarine. So they are very sensitive to US surveillance activities in the region. So it makes very good sense for them to negotiate with the US that if you don't stop these activities, then we will very well declare a ADIZ zone. ADIZ zone.
Yeah.
But again, how it will work out, whether countries will follow it, it's going to be we have to wait and watch.
How do you see it if China comes with a second movement with declaring this part of the sea, the ADIZ? Will it have a cascading effect on other countries or the tension between the countries?
Well, this is one of the possibilities that I thought would happen in this interregnum before the next president is sworn in. But I think from what I can see now, maybe the Chinese have kept that in reserve. Apparently, they've already drawn up the plans. The Academy of Military Science has already drawn up the plans for the new air defense identification zone.
Okay.
But if the Chinese do announce it, regardless of what political stand the other countries may take, they will have to fall in line, because no one can take a risk with a passenger aircraft violating an ADIZ.
Okay.
And in fact, just a couple of months ago, I think it was in late October or early November, the Chinese have introduced a new regulation requiring all commercial and cargo airliners to transmit their location every so many minutes to the Chinese controllers. So in a way, it's a step-by-step, shall I say, enforcement of the earlier ADIZ, and also a preparation for the next one,
okay,
if they do it. But it will be a step. It will be a definite push for again claiming their sovereignty over this island, over this patch of sea.
One thing that it would be very interesting to know to the common person, why this piece of sea or the route is so important to China and other countries, or to the US or to the India.
Well, if you look at it, there are two clear reasons that come through. One are the billions of dollars worth of minerals and natural resources that are under these waters.
Okay.
And the last estimate, I think, by the Russians many years ago was almost $1 trillion it had come to. That was their estimate. Yeah. I don't think there is a a really definitive figure. The second is the territorial claims themselves. They feel that the larger the EEZ and the larger the territorial waters, there's more potential for exploitation of these. And secondly, it gives them a reach. It gives them an ability to build their perimeters further outside in defense terms. So I think that is how it is. But as far as the Chinese are concerned, I think it's not a territorial issue.
Okay.
For the Chinese, it's an issue of finding their place under the sun, if I may say. That is, that this portion of the world, the Asia Pacific, is their backyard, and they want to be the top people in this, or the top dog in Asia Pacific.
Okay.
I think that is the key issue for the Chinese.
Okay, and when most of the countries, especially the neighboring countries, are coming against China, will it change the tilt in favor of US and allies and other countries and against China?
Yes, it can. It
and
depends
will eventually put the pressure to Chinese to mend its ways, or what?
Well, there will be pressure on the Chinese, which can act in two ways. The Chinese can become stiffer to resist it, but a lot depends, I think, on what the US is going to do. It cannot expect others to just stand up. They are much weaker than China, and I don't think the Chinese are going to go out of their way to pick a fight with Japan. But with others they can, and they've already started talking in very tough language about Taiwan, saying that peaceful reunification is now almost an option that will not be used. So they have threatened it after the telephone talk between Trump and the Taiwanese president.
Right, right.
So I think a lot depends on what posture the US is going to take.
Okay.
And they have their own problems with the economic interconnection and interdependence between China and the US.
Do you also see that coming together with most of the neighboring nation against China will change the dynamics and put the pressure on China?
I think I agree with him that US is the biggest player in the region, and US naval force, China is very careful of US naval force, and they are very cautious about their deterrence capability. So I think one of the most influential players who can regulate Chinese behavior is the US naval forces in the region and the US leadership. Whether the smaller countries can resist, I think it will depend on whether the smaller countries go with US and whether the US can bring these countries together to put diplomatic pressure on China. So I think at the end of the day, US is a major player in this region, and whether they can regulate the Chinese behavior or not.
Military movement is there, escalation is there. Do you see any possibility of war or skirmishes between the Chinese and the US navies, or something else?
I don't think it is in Chinese interest. I don't think the US is pushing for it. They would rather just keep nudging each other into some kind of a modus vivendi. Neither wants conflict. It will derail their economies. And Trump just coming in, he certainly doesn't want a conflict.
Right.
So I don't see conflict being there, but I certainly see if the US wants to retain its position as the number one
power in the world,
then it will have to lean heavily on the Chinese and issue, whatever kind of threats it wants to behind the closed doors of Zhongnanhai.
Okay, thank you very much. On this note, we are going to wrap up this program. Thank you very much, Mr. Ranade, and thank you very much, Dr. Pratibha. As people say, the territorial disputes are never about justice, but all about the power struggle, international or geographic politics, as well as economic and military maneuvers. That's all we have in this edition of Public Forum. Thank you very much for watching us.